to you. We are, can you hear me okay? I saw a mute. Okay, good. So hats off to everybody who's out here working in August and still delivering to their clients and the communities that they work in. We have HUD coming as a guest who will be on for the second half of the call, and wanted to bring you up to date on a few emerging issues beforehand. So let's dive right in. Let's do a quick review of the agenda, and we'll be ready to go. So as hopefully many of you know, we've been doing a survey on the impact of the shrinking funding available to housing counseling agencies. We're getting very good data from it. Matthew's going to do a rundown on the preliminary results. God, I mean, I don't know how many, 160, 170 groups have replied already. But if you haven't, now's the time. We really need to have a strong showing here. Lots of very interesting data. We'll give you some preliminary results. The HUD has an annual meeting with the intermediaries and housing finance agencies in August, and I thought I'd just give you a few highlights from it, information that'll be helpful for you to know about things that HUD's working on and trends that impact our work. And then we are deep into studying the streamlined model that would replace HAMP that the MBA has proposed and Fannie and Freddie are considering, and we will be meeting with FHFA soon about. Thank you to the many who have responded with examples of clients that you got a tier 1 mod on. We're going to have Ellie Pepper on the line to give first quick impressions from what we're learning from this. And if you have considered doing this, try to push this out today, because this is a lot of work for Ellie, and I think we're getting close to the time where we have to consolidate all our data. We're going to be in order to be able to use this with the policymakers. And we could use definitely more people who are low income in the survey, so that would be great if you could keep an eye out for that. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then a good half of the call we'll devote to the Form 9911, which certifies that home ownership housing counseling has taken place. Looks like HUD is doing a major rethinking on this form, and we'll have a number of HUD people to talk about it. And there'll also be plenty of room for Q&A and for you to raise issues. This form, I think, will be important to us in the future, and will be an important key to building the integrated housing counseling system that we've all been working on. So this is, well, you know, forms are seen as bureaucratic issues for lots of people. I think this is a very important piece for our work, and it'd be very helpful to get your feedback on it. And big appreciation to the people that have already jumped in on it. And then we've gotten a bunch of groups to join NHRC, so we're getting some new memberships again, which is just terrific. And certainly we'll talk a little bit about membership at the very end of the call. But let's dive in. So let's start out with the impact of the funding cuts and our survey. So Matthew, you've done a preliminary tabulation. What are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So as Bruce mentioned, I think the survey's been out for maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks so far. We've had a pretty good response. I think we're around 140 responses, which is good, but as Bruce said, it would be extremely helpful to have more people to participate so we can have more and better data to look at. I'm just going to run through some of the key questions that we asked, and again, these are just preliminary results, and I'm not going to go through everything in the survey, but just give you a quick look at some of the questions we've asked about. One, I think perhaps among the most striking findings is the question we asked. We asked both over the last 12 months and last 24 months, but here we just have over the last 12 months, asked people whether they had lost housing counseling staff, whether they had added staff, or whether there had been no change. As you can see there on the left, exactly half of respondents said that they had lost staff over the last 12 months. So that's obviously significant that you know, if that holds, if roughly half of agencies are shrinking their housing counseling staffs, that's a pretty significant impact, and a very small number, only 8%, said that they were adding staff. The other, I think, really significant thing is we asked, we asked it in terms of how many staff do you have today, how many did you have 12 months ago, how many did you have 24 months ago, so we could get an idea of kind of the scope of how much staff those who are losing, staff are losing. And you see it significant. About half of agencies who said they lost staff over 12 months said it was between a quarter and half of their staff. And then another quarter of those said that it was 50% or more of their staff. So that's pretty, if you say that if half of all the agencies responded lost staff and half of those lost between a quarter and 50% of their staffs, that's a quarter of all respondents saying that their staff over the last 12 months has shrunk between 25 and 50%, and an eighth saying that they've lost at least half of their staff over just 12 months. So those are pretty alarming numbers, I would say. Just a couple other questions we'll touch on. So we asked folks to kind of give reasons that were given for staff who had left. You'll see there's a lot of different reasons, as you would expect, for why folks are leaving, but a very significant number, 28%, so more than a quarter, said that they had laid off staff. Another, about the same number of respondents, said that staff had left to find a new job with better salary benefits. Another significant, at 13%, is staff leaving to find a new job with less stress, something that's less emotionally draining. And then you see just, relatively known but significant numbers for some of the other responses. So their staff had been part-time and they found a full-time job, or they found a job with better hours, stayed in counseling but went to a different agency. So that's, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, just the reason for this kind of trying to fine-tune it a little bit was just to get a sense of, are we able to have competitive salaries and competitive working conditions given the funding streams? And this sort of gets at that question too, about how much it's not simply staff positions, but also we're losing talent because of the funding challenges we've got.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, absolutely. Sorry, there's a question that came in. Oh, so someone asked if for agencies that lost staff, did they replace them or just an overall cut in the program? So this, and again, we'll stress that this is a preliminary analysis. So some of the answers, I think there's going to be some explanation given when folks were given the chance to give open-ended answers. So in those open-ended responses, some folks did say, we're looking to replace that position, or give some further explanation that I think will kind of shade the ultimate analysis. But the results that I presented on the previous slide here, that's just raw numbers of how many staff do you have today, how many staff did you have 12 months ago, how many staff did you have 24 months ago. So those numbers reflect absolute loss of staff people. So there may be some intent to replace them in the future, but as far as we know at the moment, that's just lost. Yeah. And I think just one more thing I was going to, oh yeah, so the other thing I was going to touch on is we asked a question about what your agency would do if if NFMC is not funded for FY 2017, which certainly appears to be Congress's intent is not to fund it. So 20% said they would lay off staff. 11% said that they would stop offering foreclosure prevention counseling. A relatively small number, but still, I think it was 3 total respondents said they would be forced to close the organization, which, even though that's not a huge number, that's pretty alarming. There's a decent number of others that, again, we'll kind of parse more carefully in the final analysis. 1 out of 5 don't receive NFMC funding. 25% said they won't make any changes, but I think that, again, will also be shaded when we dig a little deeper. I think it's folks saying that we'll have to look for funding elsewhere, and if we're not able to find funding elsewhere, we may need to do layoffs. So I think there's going to be, in the final analysis, there'll probably be some more nuance to this. Let me just see. There's one more question coming in from Arlene Nunes from HUD. are staff losses for those offering mortgage default counseling, or does it cover pre-purchase counseling too? So we phrased the question of housing counseling staff. So it's all housing counseling staff, not just foreclosure prevention. Someone asked what the other means. That's I just was doing a quick analysis to give some preliminary findings here. I did look at some of the other responses, and it was, suggested things like some of the options we presented. So some of the others seemed like they were actually saying we would stop doing foreclosure prevention counseling. Some of them were saying things like we would look to try to find other sources of funding, but layoffs may be what we ultimately got to if we didn't find alternate funding. So it was things like that. So in the final analysis, we'll kind of parse that other category more finally. I think that's all for questions, and that's all. I just wanted to kind of quickly go through this. Bruce, do you want to add anything else before we move on? Good.
No, just a plug that if your agency hasn't filled this out, please do it. And also we ask for the names of any agencies you know that have either closed their program, their doors, or closed their different housing counseling programs that they provide. We're just trying to get our arms around sort of what the shrinkage looks like.
And I did, yeah. So there's a bunch of questions we didn't touch on, but we got, we do have a list of, I think it's maybe 30 or 40 agencies that folks let us know had closed. So yeah, we'll be doing a much more comprehensive report, probably September, maybe until October.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much, Matthew. So let me move on to so the HUD intermediaries meeting is done each year, and it's been done for a couple of decades now, I think. And also the housing finance agencies come to the meeting, and a few of people like me come to the meeting. And it's what's helpful about it is I think that they do hit on a number of the things that HUD is thinking about, concerned about, or trends in the industry. And I wanted to share some of these points with you so that you are familiar with what the conversations are like, and certainly if you want to add input where this is definitely the right thing to do, and certainly we could shoot questions to our HUD team, who's very well represented on this call today, and if you want to do something immediately. So just starting off, they identified 13.2 million households had been served by housing counseling since April 1, 2009. Significantly, the number of HUD-approved housing counseling agencies for the first time is below 2,000. So we were at 2,300 last year, 2,400 plus the year before, and we've dropped. I did post yesterday the chart of comparing federal funding for housing counseling and the number of agencies, and you do see as the funding goes down, there's like a year or two lag, but the number of counseling agencies drops as well. And when they are counting this, they're identifying the number are offices. So it's possible for an agency to have several offices, and each will be identified as an agency under that listing. Not sure that HUD can do it just by agency, but it's very helpful to know which where there are offices as well. So because it does give you a sense of the reach of the counseling agencies. HUD is looking at doing revisions to the handbook and rulemaking, and is considering a bunch of big questions that impact our work. And I'll give you an example of a few of them. And HUD did convene a stakeholder call about this, and there may be other opportunities too to have input. But so questions like, do you currently, in order to provide services in a state, you have to have a bricks and mortar office to deliver those services. So you have to have a location of an office. And the question is that still relevant today? So you're not required to do that in HECM counseling, and apparently there was an exception made for the HOPE hotline so that it could provide services across the country during the foreclosure crisis. And the question now is, should other agencies be able to do that as well? And the counter sort of concern is, what about the local knowledge issues and the quality of counseling to be delivered? Do you need to know what the local down payment assistance programs are and the localized mortgage products and lenders, or is it okay to use to do one of these national programs? And there are some programs that do track what down payment assistance is available. So this is sort of done as an open question, and it's clear that HUD has not taken a position, but is trying to figure out what the appropriate thing is to do, and asking input from a broad range of stakeholders, including counseling agencies. And then there are things that are practical to the housing counseling world, like is it appropriate to require a budget for every client in order to consider them properly counseled? And the example that I think we've used in the past where that may not be so important is when somebody's coming in and they're getting rental counseling and they're trying to get either a certificate of habitability to have a problem with the condition of the building, or trying to do some other thing that's not really a financial question but more a services question, and kind of puzzled everybody why you were going through their budget in that process. And so the question is, should we continue to be mandatory, and or should there be a carve out, and what would the exceptions be where it's not required?
Bruce, and I'm just going to, so John,
sure.
John Olmsted from HUD, who's going to be joining us, just jumped in the chat box, saying that currently we allow counselors to provide telephone counseling, but they must have the capability to meet with the client face-to-face if the client wishes that. So I think that was just a little clarification.
Right. Thank you. Good, and please feel free to jump in on any of these as well. That's all helpful. Another issue was whether agencies would be able to contract out their counseling services, and whether it's or it's done exclusively by the agency that's the HUD-approved housing counseling agencies or their affiliates. And a third question was, should there be a requirement to follow up on all counseling issues? So if some things are simply informational, should there be a requirement for follow-up? And I think there's no, I don't think that's the complete list. There's no reason to think that, so if there are other things that you think in the protocols for what counseling is doing that where they're kind of out of touch or could be improved on, so now's a good time to bring this up, because it's nobody loves to open and redo the handbook. So this is right now when it's being examined. It would be the perfect time to raise those issues. The favorite topic about certification, again, because of the way that rulemaking is done, isn't allowed to give information, but it seemed to be pretty clear that going to be that the certification is still tied up in working out the legalities, and it's away, and probably several months away as opposed to several weeks away from us actually getting to see it. And another area that HUD has been paying some attention to, and you've probably seen this, is around disaster recovery preparedness. And this is very interesting stuff. I mean, obviously nobody knows when a disaster will happen in your area, but the idea is that counseling agencies have capacity, have training in how to handle these, that we're building up through Hurricane Sandy and Katrina and other experiences, you know, a body of knowledge about how to do this, and that HUD is encouraging FEMA and the disaster relief people to build in resources that would pay counseling agencies for doing the disaster recovery work. This is powerful stuff, and nobody wants to be in the situation, but it's a place where we can play an important role, and I thought it was important for people to be aware of it and thinking about it, because you never know when it becomes important in your marketplace. And the last thing I wanted to mention was that you know, we've talked a lot about marketing and strategy and how to reach clients and change the public perception of housing counseling. So HUD has contracted with Creative Marketing Resources, or CMR, and they are working on a variety of, they're doing focus groups. They did some hidden shopper visits to housing counseling agencies. They have done a broad search on what public perceptions are on housing counseling, and they're thinking about how to promote housing counseling more effectively. Are there symbols and slogans that might communicate about housing counseling more effectively? And are there strategies, both through social media and earned media and other things, that would be able to promote housing counseling in a broader way in the public mind? And some of it is around, is there some kind of a seal of approval? Is the HUD name or something that gets established that would be helpful to give, separate out HUD-approved housing counseling agencies from many of the scam outfits or self-interested outfits that are out there that are that confuse the message of who you should talk to get independent information. So it's all in a very preliminary stage. I don't think they were ready to roll out programs at all, but they were deep into trying to figure out what would be most useful.
There were a couple questions. One of them, okay, I think is probably best to put in the queue for the HUD folks. The other was, is there an exception to this rule for new HUD applicants? I'm not sure if that means for the certification requirement or I'm not sure which rule, but as far as I know, there aren't any exceptions for new agencies for any HUD rules. Does that sound correct, Bruce?
Yeah, they may be asking about, do you have to have bricks and mortar in every state that you deliver services in? So we can leave that to the HUD people, though I'm not aware of it. So why don't we move quickly on to Ellie's report so that we can be sure to have enough time for the HUD folks as well. So Ellie, are you with us?
I'm here.
Okay, big thanks for all the work you're doing on this. This is a big task and really appreciate you doing this. So we have now collected a number of people who have taken their clients that got Tier 1 HAMP modifications and run them through the new MBA proposal to see what how the clients would fare, and see if the program is a good one, or if we think they will hurt our clients, or if there's some changes we should make. So I know in the preliminary place, but what have we learned so far?
So some key points that I've actually been spending some time kind of putting together all of these numbers that are running around in my head. And so some preliminary things that I have written down this morning. There's a change. The change in payment amount for the MBA proposal ranged from as much as a $600 decrease in payment to a $500 increase over HAMP. 61% of the homeowners have equity in their property and are the most likely to see a payment reduction under the MBA modification as compared to HAMP. And of those, 64% of them could achieve an affordable mortgage payment, that's 31% housing to income ratio, without extending their term to 40 years. And just so people know, the MBA proposal automatically extends to 40 years for everybody who comes through. Homeowners with 90% loan to value or more in unpaid principal balance typically fare worse under the MBA proposal as compared to HAMP. 39% of the homeowners have very low to low income, and of them, 75% would see a payment increase under MBA as compared to HAMP, and 35% would need deeper interest rate cuts and or principal forbearance forgiveness to achieve a sustainable modification under the MBA proposal. So those are kind of like the big picture things that I've come up with so far.
I mean, it sounds like we have some deep concerns then about the MBA proposal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, the people that we're the most concerned about, it seems, are the fare the worst. The people with the lowest income and the lowest equity seem to be the ones who fare the worst under the MBA proposal and would end up with potentially not a very good modification. The other thing that, this is, as Bruce is aware, my concern is particularly those people who have equity, that they're pushed into a 40-year term when they aren't necessarily required to do that. So, as I mentioned, 61% of the homeowners have equity, and 64% of them could achieve an affordable mortgage payment without extending their term. So, as you know, when you extend the term to 40 years, all of the interest gets paid up front again. So it, puts a homeowner in a position of really losing a lot of equity and making all of their payments now again for 10 to 20 years. That is mainly towards interest and not so much towards the principal.
Well, this is disturbing and troubling and difficult. I mean, to be candid with everybody, there's a lot of momentum behind these streamlined proposals. So the MBA is one player in this, Fannie and Freddie are another. Fannie and Freddie haven't adopted the MBA proposal or agreed with it, but have been intrigued about it. We had been hopeful that there is an affordability mechanism so that it would test out if the payment brought somebody down to, so not the 31% affordability that HAMP uses, but the MBA said if it got you down to 40% of your household, your housing payment compared to income, that your HTI, your front-end ratio would be down to 40%, that would be considered affordable. And if it didn't, then there was a step down that it would take too to do a second level to try to get a bit closer to affordability. We had talked about, I don't know if you got to it, about the ideas, could we make that affordability trigger drop down to 31%? Would that improve things?
Well, enough? So I have not gotten to that analysis yet, but if I were to say just anecdotally from, parsing through these so many times, I'll say that it's very difficult to get down to 31% if the interest rate is not lowered. So the lowest interest rate, the way that the MBA proposal works, for those of you who don't know, it's 4% or the interest rate that the homeowner currently has on the mortgage, whichever is lower. And we did a comparison for a 6% interest rate environment or an 8% interest rate environment. And I think we went with 4% because that's kind of what it is right now. So if I'm looking at 4%, even just at 4%, it's in many cases hard to get to 31% housing to income ratio without some kind of deeper either forbearance or forgiveness or a deeper interest rate cut. And that's why HAMP worked so well, because you could forbear and forgive, or you could extend, and you could reduce the interest rate down to 2%. So those are some of my initial things, and I will say that in a higher interest rate environment, it's almost impossible to get to 31% HTI with the MBA proposal.
And can I just jump in quickly to answer someone's question? And we should have explained this up front, but MBA is the Mortgage Bankers Association, so it's a trade group.
Yes,
sorry about that, guys. Yeah. All right, got caught in the abbreviations. So I'm going to throw in one quick sentence about this, and there'll be plenty of time to talk about this more in the next few calls. But the Streamlined has the advantage of being having a much lower level of documentation. It might be a month's worth of pay stubs or similar appropriate documentation, and eliminating a bunch of others. So it means that more people will qualify for those people that weren't able to qualify, and broadens the pool some, but at the cost, it sounds like, of many people that we'd like to help not getting a deep enough sustainable modification. I think the other piece that we're going to try to argue is that there ought to be, we ought to create an island or pool of opportunities for deeper mods for people who come through housing counseling, where we would be willing to do the packaging and documentation, and as long as it's a built-in funding mechanism, give us the opportunity to get people to a more personally fit modification. And I don't think we're going to have Streamline go away, but that might be another tool in the box. So we're going to do a lot of work on this week, this next upcoming week. And if you've got cases you're doing, we really need them now, because we have to pull together the final numbers on this. So if you could complete them today, that'd be very helpful. And again, I think we're very interested in more examples from lower income. And if you've got some examples from the South and from the West Coast, we're a little bit thinner there as well. So any other parting thoughts, Ellie? Really thank you for all the work you've done here.
No, nothing at this time.
Great.
Thanks to everybody who has submitted cases so far. Thank you.
Yeah, really powerful stuff. So really appreciate all the people that stepped up on this. This is exactly, really appreciate that you're part of the community and looking out for all of us on this. Thanks. Okay, so we have as our guests today, representative from HUD, and I'm going to introduce Arlene Snoons as our representative, and she'll also tell us who else from HUD is joining the call. But we are at a point where, as you know, we've done a lot of work around trying to integrate housing counseling more effectively into the mortgage process, both in origination and in servicing. And one of the key elements here was, how does the lender know, how does the servicer know that housing counseling took place? And this Form 9911 will be the tool. HUD's done a lot of deep thinking about what this might look like, but it may become that this is a form that we all kind of live and die by, because it will be the way that your work gets integrated into the mortgage process. So with that note, Arlene, are you there? And welcome to the call.
I am here. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who's on the call. I would like to mention that we have John Olmstead from HUD and Colleen Weiser from HUD who are on the call as well, who will be fielding some of the questions that may come our way in regards to the forms. I do want to clarify before we start that HUD is actually working on two forms. One is a revision of the 9911, and a second form is a brand new form that we're creating, which does not yet exist and would be receiving a new OMB number. The form that we have here in front of us that we're looking to revise would cover all homeownership-related counseling. So all the different types of counseling that are homeownership-related on the front end as well as on the back end. So where you have mortgage default counseling, this particular form would be used to evidence that counseling. The second form would cover all other types of counseling that are not homeownership related. In other words, you would have your rental counseling, your mobility counseling, homelessness counseling, as well as some other forms of counseling that will have like a generic category for called other, that could be used to identify the type of counseling that's not homeownership related but taken. So that would be the second form. Overall, what we're looking to achieve with our forms are the following. We're looking to first evidence that either education or counseling was taken. We're looking to serve, we're looking to document. There's a lot of background noise. Someone may not be on mute. Okay. All right, so just to review, so the first thing that we're looking to do with these forms is to evidence the fact that counseling or education was taken. Secondly, we're looking to document the type of counseling that was taken. Thirdly, to provide information on what the client was actually charged for counseling. And then something that's relatively new is looking to document who paid for the charges for the counseling, and also looking to have the certificate serve as either an invoice for future payment of the counseling. So if in fact you have the client who pays a portion or none of the charges when the certificate is issued, then if you as a housing counseling agency have some type of arrangement for some other entity, a third party, to pay for that counseling, this form would allow us to identify that in fact that situation exists and that payment will be would be made in the future for that counseling. Also, so in essence, it would serve as an invoice. And finally, we're looking for the form to also serve as an invoice for reimbursement for client-paid services. In other words, if there are pre-arrangements in place where the client pays initially for the counseling and then is eligible for reimbursement in the future, we would want this invoice to serve as a reimbursement tool. Now, these forms that we're working on, we've been working on them with Fannie and Freddie. We're looking to have them automated in our single-family housing FHA systems. So currently where we have HECM counselors that are able to generate the certificate, the HECM certificate in our FHA systems, we would have our counselors in the industry that are certified counselors be able to access the system as well, to be able to generate these certificates online. So there is an automation component to this as well. In terms of who has access to this, or to the information on the certificates, there's certain information that we absolutely need to have because they're requirements, federal requirements. The privacy notice, the client would need to provide us authorization to share the information on the counseling with other parties. So that type of information, that type of language will need to remain in the certificate. So, and the certifications as well. I know that our existing form has two certifications, one from the client and another from the counselor. So there may be opportunities here to look at condensing those certifications, and that's something we'll need to work on with our legal team to see what is possible. But these are some of the things that as we're revising the existing HUD 9911, and as we're creating this new form that would cover other types of counseling, we're thinking about maybe making it more user-friendly, automating it so that lenders could easily integrate into the mortgage process and into the underwriting, and also to serve as a tool for payment. The certificate is not intended to set policy or to even discuss policy related to charges. It just captures what those charges are, who pays for them, and whether or not they're going to be paid at the time of issuance or if they're going to be paid at a later date. So that's pretty much what these certificates entail at this point. But your feedback on how, some of the content, what you would like to see, what would make it more user-friendly for you, all that information would be very helpful as we're designing and developing and automating the certificates. The other thing I want to point out is that before these certificates are final, they obviously have to go through an OMB approval process. They have to be published for public comment, and the public in general, as well as the housing counseling agencies, anyone would be able to provide comments on the content, the usability of it, features that that perhaps we have not thought of that you see are essential to the industry. These are all opportunities that you would have during the publication period to comment on the forms. And certainly your input now is something that we can take back and start looking at, you know, maybe things that we haven't thought about that we need to start thinking even before it goes out for public comment. Before these forms are even published, I do want to make sure that people understand that we're looking to do a whole communications plan around this, and there would be training also available for counselors on how to use this, when it's going to be implemented. So I just want to make sure that people understand that this isn't something that's just going to be going out without a plan around implementing it. So I don't know if my colleagues on the phone have anything to add, Colleen or John, but please feel free to chime in.
I just want to say, for those of you who may not know, OMB is the Office of Management and Budget, and there is a federal rule called a PRA, which is the public reporting burden. That's what Arlene referred to, that any time the federal government, any federal agency requires their client, in this case the housing counseling agencies, to do any type of reporting or documentation, that is considered a reporting burden. So we have to submit what's called a PRA, Paperwork Reduction Act package, submit that to the Office of Management and Budget. In this case, we're requiring a form, so we have to report what the burden to the industry would be on this form. That's a very lengthy process, and what Arlene said, there'll be 2 Federal Register notices that have to go out, a 30 and a 60-day notice, and we would let you know when that's available. And yes, we appreciate any comments ahead of time, but during the notice period, yes, the public can send in comments, and we sometimes receive comments besides from the Housing Counseling Agency. We might receive them from lenders or the MBA or other parts of the larger stakeholder world that falls under the umbrella of the Office of Housing Counseling.
And we have a bunch of questions and comments, so if maybe we could dive into those if y'all are ready.
Sure.
Yeah. Right, before you do, I just want to say one other thing. Because of some timing restrictions, Arlene said we're doing revisions to the 9911, which is an existing form. It may be a 2-step process where, just because of some internal rules here within the agency, it may be one that we improve the paper form first, even if we never utilize it, and then the automation of the 9911 and this other form would be a 2nd stage process. So I just want to explain that up front, and we would certainly keep the industry informed as to our progress. Now you can open the line.
All right, and I'll just say as well, some folks asked just some more general HUD questions. I'm going to save those if we get to those at the end. I will do my best to, but there's a lot of questions, so we may not be able to get to everything. First, I think this is mostly just kind of comments, but there may be a question worked in here. The person says, regarding Form 9911, they don't number their certificates from class, and it doesn't seem that a numbering system is necessary. So just jump in if you want to respond to any of these, but are
they talking about the certificate number that appears at the right-hand side of the certificate? Is that what they're referencing?
I'm not positive, but I'm guessing that is.
Okay, so that certificate numbers that are issued on these forms are really critical, especially from an automation point of view, because those certificates are the numbers that are used to link different systems together in order to process them through. For instance, if you have a counselor who issues a certificate, you have the name, and you have the certificate number. If that certificate is being issued for pre-purchase counseling, and that is a requirement for a particular mortgage product, the way that the system recognizes that counseling has been taken could either be through the paper form, which is how it's normally done today, but it's also through an automated process. It would be linked through the certificate number. So it's critical that those numbers are in place for purposes of streamlining processes.
All right.
I don't know if my colleagues have anything more to add on that.
All right.
Not at this
So,
time, no.
So this person made a bunch more points, including pointing out a typo, but I'll just going to do one more of his points and then move on. So it's basically the verified requirement for the person's name. They're saying that basically that's a burden on them doing it at the workshop. I think it's a time issue or some other issue with verifying the name or verifying the person's name. So they ask that you remove that verified component of the person's name.
So I would ask the individual who asked the question, I would ask them how would they verify that the individual who is taking the counseling is the person that says they are who they are.
Yep. And we should just say, I mean, this is the beginning of, as the HUD folks said, this is, you know, the beginning of a process, and folks will have plenty of opportunity to weigh in and you know, make the case for why you know, a change should be made.
But I think this may be an opportunity too to find a better way of doing it. So if there is a suggestion as to how that can be done, please forward that along. If it's a burden for you and there's a better way of doing it, please share that with us, because it would be useful information for us to use as we, you know, do this form.
And I would just say, I mean, I know for some of my agencies in my own portfolio, especially when I do their performance review, a lot of them ask for their driver's license, and they make a Xerox copy and they put it in their client file. I don't know if that's across the board. I can't say it's for all types of counseling, but that's one way to verify who the client is. Sometimes it's also maybe a rental agreement or you know, proof of the mail who this person is. But again, if you have other ideas, as Arlene says, we'd like to hear them.
All right. So the new Form 9911, how will the fees be assessed? Will we have a fee structure or guidelines to go by?
So again, I want to reiterate that the form itself is just evidencing what the charge is. But in terms of how the charges, how you come up with the charges, that is more of a policy issue, but we do have policy around that, and I'm going to field that question to John Olmsted to answer.
Thanks, Arlene. Basically, the way HUD views counseling fees, there's a couple of types of counseling where fees aren't permitted, and that would be in default and homeless for some of the more obvious reasons. But agencies are permitted to charge counseling fees for various other forms of counseling, and as part of our review, what we look to do is verify that those costs are reasonable and justifiable, you know, that they can justify the fees that they're collecting, and that you're not collecting fees from the grant and for the same activities that you're collecting from the client and things like that. HECM has always had a fee structure. There's been some miscommunication over the years about whether there's a maximum, and there isn't. Again, it's the max, and we put some guidance out about that about a year ago. You know, we permit the counseling agencies to charge a fee that, you know, as long as they can support that cost. Right now, what drives HECM fees more than anything is market competition between counselors that the market doing what it can do to keep fees down a little bit lower, but there isn't a cap per se. Again, I would emphasize that as part of our performance reviews of agencies, we look at what fees you're charging and whether you can support those fees in showing that they're against legitimate expenses for the time spent in counseling with the clients, primarily in the pre-purchase and post-purchase non-default counseling. Many counseling agencies certainly charge a fee for group education type classes, particularly to cover the cost of material preparation and things of that nature, which has always been permitted. HUD's requirement that that you only make sure that you've advised your client of what your fee structure is before you engage them in any activity, so that they're not surprised. And it's in an office setting, we would ask that fee structure be posted in a clear and open setting so everybody coming in would be aware of it. And anytime you have telephone counseling, that at the initial intake session you talk about those fees up front. In the HECM arena, the intake session is something we do not permit the counseling agencies to charge a specific fee for, although the cost of that sometimes gets spread out if the counseling goes forward and they actually close. Interestingly enough, the majority of HECM fees end up being paid by the client and out of loan proceeds. I hope that covers it adequately. Certainly, if people have more questions about it, they can send those questions to us at housing.counseling@hud.gov, and we can help provide some additional guidance.
Great. We got a ton of questions, so I'm going to try to get through as many as we can. I'm going to combine a couple here. One person said that their intake form captures the data. Another person asked why their CMS isn't enough to document the information requested on the 9911. So I think a bunch of people have kind of made the point that they're already collecting this information in some alternative way.
So as it relates to the mortgage process, are the intake forms that are being prepared, that are being collected right now, is that something that's integrated into the mortgage process? Do they have that set up with a lender already?
Bruce is shaking his head no. No.
Okay. So that's going to be key to streamlining or to having even lenders, as we know, have kind of stepped back in regards to counseling, integrating it into the mortgage process. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is because it's very much a manual component right now. And so one of the things that we have heard from the lender side is we need to streamline this. We need to make it standard. We need to make it a normal part of the process. And the way to do that is through automation. And so by automating it in FHA systems, it would be automated for our FHA lenders. For those lenders who are Fannie and Freddie lenders that are not FHA approved, there's got to be some other system or some other way to integrate the housing component into the mortgage process. And that's something that we have talked to Fannie about, how this information on these certificates would follow through to those program lenders that are not FHA approved lenders. So there's been some discussion around that.
And I would just add that that's part of what our goal was with the Uniform Residential Loan application, to get the data fields captured there so they then were tied to the mortgage.
Right. So we've been working on that. We've been certainly working on adding the housing counseling component in there.
And I would just say that the critical thing is to make sure that there's 100% syncing between what the synchronization between what the IRLA data fields are and what's on your form. we're going to have a problem, because that's the one thing that the lender will know will be of how to fill in the ERLA data fields.
Right. Thanks, Bruce, for making that point. That's correct.
I'm going to pass over a few, but there's definitely a bunch more comments regarding automation and syncing it to the intake form. So I think that seems to be something that's really got people's attention. So we should continue kind of thinking that through.
Okay.
Someone asked if it's going to change the nature of grant reimbursement for the program.
No. You mean like the HUD grants, you mean?
For the CHC program, or I'm not sure if that's meant to be OHC. I'm not. Let's assume it's OHC.
No, that's not tied into that at all.
All right. Will the 9911?
So I will say that this could help identify how to get payment for, in case people that were provided counseling with the lenders, so that this creates a documentation flow that has the fee basis built into it. So that's a very helpful piece.
That's correct. That's correct, Bruce. There, like I said, one of the points of making some of the revisions to the form was really so it can serve as an invoice for reimbursement, not only for the client, but for payment with the lenders out of the loan proceeds, out of seller concessions that have been offered to pay for the counseling as part of the mortgage transaction. And in cases of mortgage default where you have the servicer paying for the counseling on the back end, that also would, this invoice would, or this certificate would serve as an invoice for payment in that respect as well.
Great. Will the form be available in Spanish and other languages?
That is an excellent question. At this time, it has not been envisioned for that, but it is something that we definitely need to consider, especially since, we have Puerto Rico and other individuals in the U.S. that are, Spanish is their native language, and we certainly need to think about that. That's something that we're going to take back to our group and see how or if we can do that at this time. It may be something that we do in the future, but it is certainly something we need to think about.
All right. Just a few more minutes. We'll get to a couple more questions. Will the certificate number be automated, meaning the agency won't manually be creating that certificate number?
No, the system would be doing that.
All right. Is the 9911 form expected at the first appointment or after the counseling is coming to an end?
It would be at the end of counseling.
All right. This is maybe back for John, a pricing question. If the agency does not charge any fees, do they need to have posted that they do not charge any fees?
I think it would be handy if they did. Just as a matter of clarification, if, and I would put it in the context of, say, a HUD reviewer coming out to the agency and, sat down to do their interview and said, I noticed you don't have a chart up indicating what your fee structure is, and at that point they might mention, well, we don't charge fees. And then it doesn't become an issue. So I think it could be helpful if they had some kind of documentation posted that indicated, these services are provided without charge or something like that. But certainly as long as they were able to show us that they weren't charging fees at all for any types of counseling, and I have counseling agencies that I work with who do not, that wouldn't be a major concern. But if we did determine that they were charging fees, then it would become a concern because it wasn't posted adequately and the clients wouldn't have adequately been aware before receiving the service.
All right. Should we, Bruce, do you want to keep going, or it's right at 2 o'clock?
Yeah, you know what, we should close it down. So maybe what we'll do is people who wrote me before the call, we gave those comments to HUD, and let's see if we can't go through what people have sent us on the chat box, and we'll try to assemble those and give them to HUD as well. We know that this is a work in progress. We may want to have you come back in a future thing. But I think it's the high point here to me is that this is part of the automation of it and integration of housing counseling. This is an important tool to do this. And what we're talking about is on the home ownership side, and then there'll be a separate form for the other one. And I would just add the kind of, instead of having big blocks of paragraphs, to have check boxes about the services delivered and to have as little text as possible. And certainly not to have how much time it takes to fill out the form to be the first thing you read when you do it. It's an intimidating form in the old version.
Understood. That yes, we've thought about some of the issues that you just brought up, making it a simpler read. And yeah, I agree. Putting some of that required language towards the end would be something that fulfills a requirement, but it's not the first thing you see.
Right.
Right, and there is flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much. We will continue the conversation at the later call, hopefully, or we'll see what your first draft is, and I'm sure we'll be engaged in talking about it.
Wonderful.
Just quickly, great. Just quickly, please, we've had actually a flurry of new groups join NHRC. Really appreciate the support, large groups and small, and that's all terrific. That's really helpful to our work. We'll continue doing it. If you are getting the discount on the directors and officers insurance, or even just got a quote on it, I'd love to hear how that worked with your group. We will continue doing all the good work we do, and we'll want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. So next call will be September 1st, and we're going to have Sylvia Alvarez and talking about their Home Track client or online education program, and we'll have a demo. A few of you have seen it. Their strength seems to be that they've made theirs a little more entertaining and but still high content. So it'll be interesting and fun to see that. We're also going to have David Young from Housing Action Illinois. They've done a very helpful survey of client management systems that are approved by HUD. And it's available online, and I think we've circulated the link, but we'll do it again before the next call. It's kind of a big step forward in that it gives, I think, a range of what the tools are that people have available right now, and as a starting point if you want to look for a new CMS. But we'll keep the work going. There's a lot going on in our field right now, and we'll have next time we'll have more to report on what it looks like in terms of what's replacing HAMP, and we're doing a lot of work around trying to have a more funding sustainable program. Please don't forget, if you haven't done the survey on cutbacks, please get that in now, because we're trying to finish that up so we'll have a full report. Thank you, everybody, for all the good work you're doing out there.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.